Far too often, real estate investors don't realize that in order to treat your real estate investing like a business, there are certain things that we need to consider. Property management being one of the most important. Do I manage myself? Do I get a property manager? Why should I? Why shouldn't I? What is the ramifications? I'm joined today by an expert in that field. Jason McGuire with Real Property Management joins me. Jason, welcome.
Hey, Patrick, always happy to be here. And what a great intro. Thank you for taking this up.
Yeah, something, we look at real property management, we look at property management overall, something as a coach myself over many years, thousands of real estate investors and small business owners, we start to look at certain aspects of how we treat our real estate investing like a business. And we start to understand that we invest in real estate, but then we don't realize that we also have to say, where are we investing our time? What is the best use of our time? And so in the context that I often share from stage of treating your real estate investing like a business, one of the things I shine a light on is property management. And so rather than look at property management as a cost or an expense, and I get it, it is when you look at your profit and loss statement, all those things understood. But when we really look at property management, I've shifted my views over the years and even how I coach and share is that it really is part of the investment in having that asset, that real estate, be the best performing. And great property management is critical. So real property management, RPM, you are an expert in that area. What is your experience when you're dealing with your clients? What are some of the things that you see as the ceiling of limitations, the belief systems? Should I, shouldn't I? Give me some kind of insights, or give our listeners some insights into why property management and how it is, in fact, an investment.
Yeah, awesome question here. I love it. It's one I get all the time. And it's one I love talking about too, because it came down to a story very similar to how I started in investing in real estate. And so I'm going to share that with you because I can't stop saying this. I love it. Um, you know, my father's been in real estate. My grandmother's been in real estate. And much like probably many of your subscribers, listeners, they probably got into real estate because somebody said, hey, buy a house. It's a great investment. Pick up this property. How could you not be in real estate? It's where all the money is. And you do. And then suddenly overnight, you're not only an investor, you're also a landlord. Well, you know what? I didn't go to school for 10 years to become a landlord. I went and got a professional degree. And now suddenly I'm thrust into a situation where I need to know bylaws, Residential Tenancies Act, housing requirements, how to deal with people. You said it yourself. This is a business. I didn't have a business plan to owning a rental property. I had a profit strategy, but I didn't have any way to go in, maximize what those relationships look like, what my investment in this industry was going to be, and of course, how to make sure it succeeds. So by teaming up with a property manager, you are getting that experience to help make sure that your real estate asset is set up in a way that it's going to perform. You are going to get those systems and tools that I sure didn't have when I started, and I know that many people can benefit from. And I also know from, we're coming up to celebrate our 15th year here in August for my office, that even if you've self-managed a unit and they go great, most people don't know the opportunity that they're missing out on because they don't take the time to continually reevaluate their assets and how you can squeeze a little bit more out of them every time. So to me, that's my story I love.
Oh, well, it's such a great point that you made. As the CEO of 4 different businesses, as a real estate investor myself, what I've learned sometimes the hard way is what is the best use of my time. And while I know a lot about accounting, I'm not an accountant. While I know a lot about bookkeeping, I'm not going to be a bookkeeper, and I don't like bookkeeping. And while I know a lot about property management, I know a lot about different tenancy rules and laws and all the rest of it, I don't want to be an expert in that field. And I certainly don't want to go through the process of learning all I need to know. I know enough that I can have a conversation with my property manager when I need to. And, to your point, is that property management really is about managing your asset. It is actually maintaining it, keeping it profitable, keeping that value there. And part of the I guess the highest value of your property is having great tenants and having a great relationship with those tenants. And while it never seems to be perfect, I just know that with the property management teams that I have for my own portfolio, we look at it and we go, man, they got rent increased when they got them. They took all the calls with issues that had to be handled because that's just what happens. And so, to your point, is that we really are, property managers really are looking after that asset far better than you can look after it, unless you're really wanting to be in the trenches. But then you ask yourself, is that the best use of your time? And do you want to learn all those nuances and deal with all those nuances of looking after your client? Now, Jason, you want to add to that before I ask you your next question? Anything you want to expand on in that comment?
Yeah, I'd love to add a few little notes because I see a lot of people run into that same trap. And don't get me wrong, anybody can manage a property. There are some provinces that require a license, but what we often come down to is, yeah, it's not really property management. We are managing relationships with tenants, with owners, with neighbors, and with real estate assets. And when you get into a self-managing situation and you run into a problem, you also have to consider investing time to educate yourself in the best way of solving that problem. And that's where we become a great resource to be able to allow these things to just happen or fast track in what's often the best way. So you can save yourself that headache, that education experience, and often expense. And I love when you consider the way you look at the cost of property management because, hey, it's not free. But where are you investing your time, money, and where do you see your greatest return? Most of the professionals I know you work with here have great high-paying jobs. They don't want to be doing a 20-hour job, or maybe they don't want to be calling a tenant to chase down a couple $100 worth of rent because that's not what they're there for.
Mm-hmm.
And on sort of the flip side, when we see people really succeed in real estate investing, you want your time to invest and spend it where you choose, not when your tenants are reaching to call out to you when it's convenient for them, asking you to come over to a visit or dealing with a plumber. You became an investor to grow wealth, not to deal with problems. And so we like to facilitate that.
Well, I think, you make some really great points in all of that, Jason. And there's something that has to be, we shine a light on one fundamental thing is that we need to surround ourselves with people who are far smarter than us in those areas of expertise that we don't have any desire to take that level of expertise to. We're not going to make our living being a property manager. I'm not going to make a living being a bookkeeper. Again, we can do all those things. It's not the best use of my time. In the world of real estate, often the best use of my time is sourcing deals, finding deals, negotiating deals. It is looking for the opportunities or creating opportunities through relationship, knowing that my properties are being managed. It's interesting, the nuances of language. We often use the term landlord, but many years ago, RAIN introduced the term rental housing provider. Far nicer, smoother way to say landlord, and it's not charged with the negative connotation of a landlord. I'm starting to see that term used more and more, which is rental housing provider. It's just more business savvy. It lands better for the tenant, who I refer to as our clients. And we have to respect tenants as clients. And if we start to use those subtle nuances, and I know that real property management, I know that you look at them that way, even though when we discuss it, it is using familiar language, but ultimately these are all the subtle things. Now, when we look at property management and what you've been doing, Jason, give me a little bit of your background. Whether it's doors under management or how long you've been in the property management game, how long have you been part of the RPM team, and give us a little bit of your background.
For sure. So I would say I got into the real estate investing game right when I could, right when I was 18. So for over 20 years now, I've had my toe in the water in different ways, starting off in the real estate industry myself. And then I saw a big problem there where even as realtors, we weren't taught how to deal with tenants and problems.
No.
So coming up through the Century 21 system, they introduced real property management to Canada. And as my dad being a owner of a Century 21 office, I attended that meeting It resonated well with me. And I think that was about 16 years ago.
Mm.
And so, like I said, we're coming up to August now, where our company office is celebrating its 15th year, uh, or completing it. So we're really excited to see where we go from here. How many doors, units, and owners that we work with? Those numbers change all the time. But generally speaking, we've got a few hundred owners that we work with, and typically somewhere around 250 different rental properties that we work with.
So what's interesting about and the importance of property management right now, especially in the environment. You're in Ontario. Are you based out of Toronto,
West End of Toronto, yeah.
West End of Toronto? And so when you look at the landlord tenant policies that Ontario has, not unlike British Columbia, far different than Alberta. The point is that there are so many nuances. There are so many challenges that that the landlord tenant rules have kind of put in our way. Navigating all of that is really the difference between being successful and really management by fire. And if you don't know what those regs are, if you don't understand the nuances, you could find yourself in trouble. You could be at the effect of what some would call professional tenants. You could be at the effect of not understanding the nuances of screening correctly. Because to me, right now, as we kind of have this conversation, given what's going on economically, screening is incredibly important. Verifying information, incredibly important. And I don't know if you want to comment on that, but if you don't have the resources, you're really taking a chance. You're actually gambling on a potential tenant. And I would even call it speculating on a potential tenant if you don't have the resources to do the proper diligence and background checks. Is that a fair statement, Jason?
I'd say it's a fair one, and I'd also say it's one that most people don't appreciate how big of a problem it could be. Still daily in my practice, we see a lot of people who use the tenant sort of approach as the first person past the post gets the property.
Mm.
And it's not always the first person who fills out the paperwork or gives you money is the best tenant for your unit.
Mm-hmm.
So we always love to advocate and put into our practice about how you can generate multiple competing tenants for your unit. And then you can pick and choose the one that you think not only fits your profile, you're going to have a good relationship with. And of course, you want to make sure that these people are going to be there to look after probably your most expensive asset that you have, short of, your individual home you live in. And so a lot of people, I think, don't put that emphasis there that they need to, because screening is going to be great. Everybody's going to advocate it. But I'm going to tell you that even if people tell you they're doing screening, you got to check what they're actually doing for those screening, who they're calling, how they're verifying information. Fraud is rampant beyond even just, the expert tenants that everybody hears about in the scary news. But how do you verify, documents are real? You're talking to real people at jobs instead of just their best friend who they share a room with. And so,
100%.
there comes a strategy that, most people don't have that set up inside of their systems and tools already. Another great benefit of working with a professional.
Well, it's interesting that you bring this up, in terms of verifying, and I'm sure that, you could probably give me some sense of it, but consider that we suggest all the time that make sure that you call the references, make sure that you call the previous 1, 2, 3 landlords or names that they've given you. How many calls do you get on a regular basis? Or do you even get calls on a regular basis? Hey, this is Joe Schmo. We have a tenant here that has used you as a previous landlord. Can you give us a reference? I mean, think about how many calls do you get? Do you get a lot? My sense of it is that I don't ever remember receiving one. But how about you?
I could probably count on one hand the number of those calls I remember receiving in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
People are not screening.
Yes. There's a lesson that is one of the most expensive lessons. I've been educating and coaching real estate investors for over 20 years, thousands of them, one-on-one, one-on-many, from stage, live, Zoom, of course, all of it. My point is this. I can't even count the number of people that we have said the most expensive lesson you will learn is to put a tenant in that you haven't screened properly or that you think is questionable, but you don't want to leave the property vacant for another 30 days. And the least expensive, the cheapest thing you will ever do is have your property vacant relative to what can happen and does happen if you put the wrong tenant in and what the cost of that can be. And so, I know that you've probably seen it all. You've got far more horror stories than I do, Jason, but would you say that that is one of the biggest mistakes that you see? If you had top five, that would be in the top three, I think. But what's your thoughts?
I definitely think it would be right up there. And I still think a lot of people don't appreciate what that actually is until they live through it. And
Mm-hmm.
that was my horror story. That was my first tenant. So it's one again I'm not afraid to share with people. And hey, it scared me out of the industry probably for about 3 or 4 months after I finally disposed of my first condo there. But it's definitely something I've built into my practice now, not only educating people
Yeah.
about what the cost of not renting a property is, what the cost of renting it to the wrong person, and then on the flip side, what's the benefit of paying them to get out of there? Because sometimes
Mm-hmm.
that's just more headaches than you'll ever appreciate down the road.
So walk me through your process, Jason. So if somebody's listening to this and goes, something I want to consider getting a property manager, I'm not, or maybe I'm not happy with my existing property management. RPM is a trusted partner of the Real Estate Investment Network, has been for a long time. We've got RPM right across the country, but specific. And I know that you follow RPM's protocols and you do what you do. But if somebody's saying, what happens next if I want to consider property management? Give me your process about somebody reaching out to you and how you handle that, taking on a new client or having a conversation with a new client that's considering property management change, and then what is the process for engaging you?
For sure. So, whenever anybody reaches out to look at our services or property management services in general, I would always recommend that both of you have the same goal in mind. And the goal should not be, hey, I want to manage more owners or take more doors under management. It's understanding what you, as the investor, want to see your asset or your portfolio do.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as the person on the other side of the phone makes sure that they have alignment with that, we find those goals, we just smash through them because then we know that we're working together in the same way to get them. So sometimes people reach out and their goal is just to fill a property. But most of the time, we find we have greater success with the investors who say, hey, I'm stuck at 3 doors. And how can you help me get to 5? And so, what we do is we start locking down their properties into a great sort of system to make sure that they're performing, they're being reviewed, they're being actioned. And then they have not only that confidence, but then that regular financial backing to go on and follow great programs like yours to help grow with that. So I think number one, you need alignment. So you need to make sure that yourself and your property
Yeah.
manager are clearly communicating where do you want to go together.
Mm-hmm.
And if they're not in alignment or they don't offer the type of services that you're looking for, then they're going to be either a stopgap or they're not going to be a good fit at all. And hey, sometimes we're not always the answer, and we're happy to say no, but we're not because
Well,
we
yeah.
succeed well when we do what we do best.
I appreciate your honesty, but you hit on some really key points. There's a phrase that I often use is that high performance is a result of low tolerances, number one. Secondly, confidence is rarely owned, it's often borrowed. And to your point, when you look at the relationship that a property manager has with the investor, you're part of the team. So, in other words, in order to have a common or a relationship that supports the goals, you have to have these conversations. You have to be able to say, well, are we in sync? Do we align with how we operate? Do we align with what your goals are? And tell us what they are so that we can get behind it, or say, something we can't accommodate, to your point. At the end of the day, when we look at aligning with a property management company, it is about delegation, not abdication. And that is only to say that many investors make the mistake of, okay, I got a property manager. Okay, that's handled. I'm out of here. But what you just said was really important. You're part of a team. You're part of the team that says, okay, what's your outcome? You want to grow that portfolio? What's the most effective way to do that? How does property management fill in and or play into those goals? And then working together and aligning. Again, it's delegation, not abdication, which means that the communication between the owner of those properties and the property management company has to be in place so that we're not overstepping and that we're actually working backwards from a common outcome. So as we wind this down, folks, if you're listening, this is a great opportunity. I encourage you to have a conversation with Jason on the RPM team and really get into and start to understand what the possibilities are so that he can look at your portfolio, he can look at what you've got going on, he can support you in an assessment, and then if it makes sense, you can then engage, be, and have RPM on your team. Jason, I'll leave final words for you. Anything that we've stepped over that you'd like to add to this?
Oh, we obviously covered a lot of great ground, and I always love to preach client education. And so, anytime you can learn a little bit more about what somebody else does that works with you is fantastic. And so it's a continual thing that we always do here, client direction, client education. And yeah, I don't know. As far as I'd go.
Perfect. Jason, thanks for your time. Thanks for your insight. Folks, reach out to Jason on the RPM team. Part of your team is the most important. Treat your real estate investing like a business. Make the best use of your time. That's likely not being property management. So, Jason, thanks again.
Thank you, Patrick.